see me? I assume that you hear me.
Yes, we see you.
Okay, very good. Welcome back. Long time no see. Just about to start. Another minute or two. Hello. How are you? Okay, we are going to start. This week is actually the most listened to Parsha in the calendar year is actually this week's Parsha. Parshas Acharei. Because this is the reading that we do always on Yom Kippur before Yizkor. And I assume that statistically, this is when you have the most amount of people in shul is during the Yizkor service. And this is Parshas Acharei, which begins and talks about Yom Kippur. This is the majority of the Parsha, about the service of Yom Kippur. And then we're getting into a chapter 17, which discusses eating services or eating meat in general, slaughtering meat outside of the temple or outside of the tabernacle. And then the Torah continues with the forbidden intimate relationships, which is the rest of the discussion of the Parsha. We are going to focus on chapter 17. We're not going to speak Yom Kippur. We are just coming off a holiday of Pesach. So I think we had enough of the holidays. Matter of fact, holidays and celebrations are never enough, because I'm going to first introduce to you two halachot, which both apply to holidays, which are being derived in the Talmud from this week's Parsha. One is in relation to the holiday of Hanukkah, and one is to the holiday of Sukkot. The Talmud tells us in Tractate Shabbat. Tractate Shabbat has chapter 2 in Tractate Shabbat talks about lighting candles on Shabbos. And it also discusses lighting candles on Hanukkah and all the laws in regard to lighting candles on Hanukkah. The weather outside feels like Hanukkah, so it's a good, appropriate time to talk about Hanukkah. So the Talmud tells us, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rabbi Asi, who said in the name of Rav, it is forbidden to count your money in front of the Hanukkah candles. Why specifically money? I guess people were receiving Hanukkah geld or getting ready to give out Hanukkah geld. So you have to imagine that in those days there's no plenitude of light. You rely on the sun and a little bit on the moon and on your candles. But candles also cost money. So you take advantage. Hanukkah candles are lit. Let me do my personal to-dos in front of the Hanukkah candles.
They had oil lamps.
They had oil lamps and they had oil candles too, but it doesn't always. If that's the only thing you have, so you're trying to avoid using. If you can take advantage of another. To count money in front of Hanukkah candles. A statement in the Gemara. Then the Gemara discusses an inquiry. Really, it's forbidden to count money. The Gemara says, what What about taking advantage of the decorations in the sukkah during the holiday of Sukkot? Is that also not allowed? You have designated for the 7-8 days of Sukkot some nice decorations. Some people hang up some fruit even, pomegranate, dates, oil bottles, wine bottles, and you want to take advantage. And you would also say that I'm not allowed to use them during the 7-8 days of Sukkot. Says the Gemara, both are forbidden, and both actually have the same source. The source is a verse in this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, it discusses the prohibition of eating or drinking blood, which is a prohibition which repeats itself numerous times in the Torah. We had it previously in beginning of Vayikra. We had it in Parshas Tzav. We're going to have it later in Parshas Acharei, in the book of Dvorim. The Torah is very strict in regard to blood. In this week's Parsha, there are 5 verses in regarding the prohibition of eating blood. Chapter 17, verse 10, starts as follows. Those have a Chumash, can look up in the Chumash. Ve'ish ish mi beis Yisrael, and any man of the house of Israel, uminager agor besoichom, and of the proselyte who dwells amongst them, asher proselytes, asher yoichal kol dom, who will consume any blood. Any blood means not only blood which we would have assumed that it's dealing with the blood of the sacrifices, because that's the content of the parsha. So the pasuk emphasizes kol dom, any blood. Benosati ponai banefesh aricheles esadom. I shall concentrate my attention upon the soul consuming the blood. And I, says God, I will cut it off from its people, which means the punishment of karet. Karet is a severe punishment, either translated as premature death or other types of interpretation. But it's known that this is usually referring to the severe sins. There's only about 36 among the 365 prohibitions, which their punishment is karet. There's actually a tract of Talmud called Kritot, which deals with that subject of karet. Who gets karet and why you get karet and so on. So it's an unusual severe punishment for a very severe sin, like eating chametz on Pesach is karet.
Does that include your own blood? If you bite your cheek?
No. Clearly not. If your tooth is falling out and you swallow some of the blood, it's not.
But you're not taking on purpose blood when you.
That besides that, even that, it doesn't apply to it. Right. So this is number 1. This is verse 1. Verse 2 continues, verse 11. Ki nefesh abosor bedam I. This sums the reason. The soul of the flesh is in the blood. Vani nesativ lochem al hamizbeach lechaper al nafshei seichem. And I have assigned it, meaning the blood, for you upon the altar to provide atonement for your souls. That's the spilling of the blood which takes place with every korban. Ki adam hu b'nefesh yechaper, for it is the blood that atones for the soul. Okay? Every living creature depends on blood. That's where the oxygen is, that's where the energy is. And when you needed to atone for your soul, What did I ask you to spill? Blood, because the blood is like the measure for measure. For your contamination or violation of your soul, you should atone it with soul type, which is blood. As verse 12 continues, Al Kain Omarti Libnei Yisrael. Therefore I have said to the children of Israel, Kol nefesh mikem lo yitoichal dam. Any person amongst you may not consume blood. But this is an additional warning, even though we already read it in verse 10, is, as Rashi explains, to teach us that it's not only that you are forbidden to eat blood, but you're expected to warn the children from eating blood. It's the adults who are responsible to make sure that the younger kids are also familiar with that prohibition. And the proselyte who dwells among you may not consume blood. Okay, so till it is prohibition. Then comes the fourth verse, verse 13. And this is a very interesting mitzvah. It's known as the mitzvah of covering blood. What does the verse say? The ish b'bnei Yisrael, any man of the children of Israel, u'minager b'toicham, and from the proselyte who dwells among them. Am I pronouncing right? Asher yotzud seit chayo oif asher yeochel. Listen carefully. Who will trap a beast or bird that may be eaten. V'shofach es domoi, he shall pour out his blood, which is the slaughtering ritual that we have, and then v'chisa'u be'ofer, and cover it with earth. So this concept of covering the blood is again applying to which animals only? Obviously kosher, but it doesn't apply to every animal. It applies only to domesticated animals or foal. So basically, if you slaughter a cow, you will not need to cover its blood. If you cover a deer, then you will have to cover the blood. Or if you slaughter a chicken, you would have to cover the blood, but not to cows.
You've got deer farms now.
Oh, but here it says in the verse, okay, now you can have a lot of things. You can adapt, but that's not their nature, I guess. But in the verse, it says clearly, chaya or off. It doesn't say behema.
It's just sign, it's hunting.
Exactly. Something which has to be hunted, which is like a duck, kachka, a chicken, right? A gans. But it doesn't apply to cows. It apply to sheep.
Shouldn't
No.
apply to sheep either.
Sheep neither. Lamb?
No.
No. Deers? Yes.
Turkeys, yes.
Turkeys, we don't know what
But they're
turkeys
wild
are.
turkeys, but they're also domestic. Depends on the color.
Okay. So here what it say clearly is what? That the blood of a chicken or a deer has to be covered, but you don't need to cover the blood of any other animal. Okay. Obviously, you're going to wonder why. That's another one question that we're going to have to discuss tonight. Why manishtana coming off of Pesach? You have to ask, what difference is it between cows that you don't slaughter and chickens and deers that you do? I'm sorry, not that you don't cover, but you do cover. But the final verse, verse 14, ki nefesh kol basar domoy benafshayu. For the life of any creature, its blood represents his life. And since the blood represents its life, va'oima libnei Yisrael, dam kol basar loisechelu. We get another emphasis. So I say to the children of Israel, you shall not consume the blood of any creature. Again, why? Ki nefesh kol basar domoyu. for the life of any creature is its blood. Whoever consumes blood will get the karet punishment, will be cut off. 5 verses, in addition to other verses, like we said earlier, which talk about the prohibition of consuming blood. But here comes an interesting word in the verse describing the mitzvah of covering blood, but the Talmud uses it as a source against counting money in front of your Hanukkah candles. What is the verse? So if you go back to verse 13, the last 2 words, it says, V'chisi'u be'ofor, v'shofach, you should pour, v'kiso, and you should cover it. The Talmud learns that these 2 words indicate that in the same manner you spill the blood of the animal, the same manner shall you cover the blood of the animal. What does it mean, the same manner? When it comes to spill the blood, you understand how is it being done. How do you spill the blood of an animal? You take your hand and you put a knife in your hand, and with your knife in your hand, you go over the throat of the animal. So that same method should be used to cover, which means that you should cover by hand. Meaning, we would have assumed that usually if you, let's say, slaughter a chicken, the blood, you stand usually in farmland over some earth, a little bit, and you have the blood spilling over the earth. So you would have assumed, since I'm standing, I'm in an upright position as it is, let me shovel some earth with my foot, with my shoes, over the blood. Why not? The idea is to cover it. I covered it. Oh, very good. Comes the pasuk and emphasizes v'shofach v'chisau. V'shofach v'chisau means that you should spill it, and that's the same way that you should cover it. Here says the Gemara an amazing statement in Tractate Shabbat, that from here we learn a concept, in general concept in halacha, shelo yiyu mitzvos bzuyos olav, that a person should not allow mitzvot to be disrespected. You have to treat the mitzvahs with honor, with respect. And shoveling earth with your shoes is disrespectful to blood. In other words, it's not that the blood contains some type of holiness, and therefore we should cover it with our hand. The way the Gemara understands is the blood, in the covering of the blood, is a mitzvah. And being it's a mitzvah, therefore we have an obligation to respect mitzvah. And that has to be done by hand. So you wonder why we can't count the money in front of Hanukkah candles, or why can't we use the decoration of the sukkah, because they would designate it to a mitzvah. A mitzvah should not be treated disrespectful. Go find somewhere else to count your money. That's not what you do in front of Hanukkah candles.
So it's just the blood that comes from the initial slaughtering of the animal. It doesn't come from the residual blood that may remain in the flesh that has to be soaked in.
Exactly. That blood has to be covered. Yes, the shchita. Very good. Now,
It's also respecting the life, because the blood is the life.
but I say, but what the Gemara learns out seemingly is not because of the life aspect of the blood. That's the reason for not eating blood. And yes, clearly in the reading of the verses, there is a relationship between the prohibition of eating blood and the mitzvah to cover its blood. But when the Talmud uses the mitzvah of covering blood as a general principle for the requirement to be not to be disrespectful to a mitzvah, comes out that it refers to every mitzvah, and it's to every mitzvah because of the idea of the mitzvah. Matter of fact, the Rambam has this book which is designated for the laws of prohibited foods and slaughtering. It's called the Book of Kedusha. In the 14 volumes, every volume has a title. That's called the title of Kedusha. Kedusha means holiness. And that's what we talked about, kashrut, the dietary laws, and so on. The Rambam concludes these laws of Shechita, and he writes, and I'm quoting you the words of the Rambam, Keshemechaseh, when you cover the blood, lo yechaseh beraglo, you should not cover it with your feet, elo beyado, or with your hands, rather with your hands, or besakin, or with the knife, or bikli, any other vessel, utensil, kedei shelo yinag bo minag bizayon. In order you shouldn't treat it disrespectfully, ve'iyu mitzvahs bzuyos olav. And mitzvahs will be considered you disrespect. And the Rambam writes, which this is very unusual for the Rambam, is seemingly a book of law, to get into some inspiration. And he writes, she'eina kavod le'atzman shel mitzvot. It's not that you're just respecting the act of the mitzvah. The respect rather goes ela lemi she'tziva ben baruch hu, the one who commanded them, to God. Ve'itzilanu, and protected us milemashesh b'choshech, and tapping the darkness and running around not knowing what to do. And he created the mitzvahs to serve as a light, a place of illumination for our direction, which is actually something which is actually brought down in the Medrash Tanchuma, which is brought down in Chassidus. The Medrash says in Parsha Vayigash, Omar Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, it actually comes from the word of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, who said, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, God the Almighty One told the Jewish people, Heyu mechabdin es ha-mitzvos, honor my mitzvos, she'em shluchai, they are my agents, they are my emissaries. Ve'shluchai shel Adam kamoisoi, the agent of one is considered like the messenger, like the one who sent them. If you honor him, if you honor the messenger, the emissary, you're honoring the one who sent him. If God forbid you disrespect him, you disrespected not only the messenger, but who the messenger represents. You need a coffee?
No.
I'm also tired. It's after Pesach. So what's the word? What is the Rambam teaching us? That this is the principle of honor. The principle of honor comes from, as the Gemara uses the words, avuon de kulu dam. Avuon means the father principle of this entire concept of all mitzvot. To respect them, and not, God forbid, to disrespect them, is all derived and energized by which mitzvah? The mitzvah of dam, the mitzvah of blood, and the covering of the blood. This is this verse. By the way, I remember seeing the Rebbe performing the mitzvah of covering the blood on Erev Yom Kippur. Early morning, by dawn, he used to walk out of his room with a rooster in his hand and go outside to the back of 770 with the shochet of a Kalmus and all of a Shalom used to stand there with the knife ready. The Rebbe gave him over the chicken. By the way, on YouTube, there's a video of it from one of the years. I actually watched it the other day. You can look it up. And the Rebbe gave him the chicken. The shochet did the shechita over a shovel with earth. Then the shochet put the chicken into the bucket, to clean up, to get his last breed. Meantime, he took off a feather from the chicken, and the Rebbe did it with the feather. He goes with the chicken's feather and 5 times kind of maneuvering the earth over the blood with chicken feather, with the feathers of the chicken, I guess. Another way of kind of showing the respect to the mitzvah by using a feather or something more, unique to the service of the chicken. That's interesting to note. Okay, let's for a moment analyze this mitzvah, this prohibition of the blood. So we said that obviously in the context of the verses, it seems like it was noted that this is because of the, like it says in the verse, ki nefesh ko, ki means because. You should cover it. Since the soul is in the blood, which is the sins can be regarding the eating, but it's regarding also the covering, that you should cover it because it represents the soul. What is the purpose of covering? So we have a few interesting insights given by different commentators. One of the classic commentators is the Chinuch. It was written many years ago, 800 years ago. It's still not clear who the author is, but it's a classic book called Sefer HaChinuch. He says as follows. The soul, like the verse says, ki nefesh habasar bedami. The life of any creature is its blood. Says the Chinuch, it's not appropriate to eat from the flesh of the animal while his spilled blood is still in front of the shochet, in front of the ritual slaughter. But then he says, but according to that, what about any animal? Why just chickens? And especially when you slaughter a cow, there's even more blood. The quantity of a cow is more blood than the blood of a chicken or a deer. So if you have to cover the blood in order to prevent so-called the cruelty feeling that here is the blood spilled and I'm already chewing on my barbecue piece, the blood is still in front of my eyes, it's kind to avoid the cruelty. So we should cover all animals' blood. Says the Chinuch that the mitzvah only applies to personal usage of meat, because the blood of korbanot, right? Mm-hmm. The sacrificial blood was never covered. What was it used for? To be spilling over the altar, which brought about the kapara. So he says most of the korbanot are made of what? Of domesticated animals, cows, sheep, goats. That's what most of the korbanot is. So the Torah did not want to differentiate between korbanot and non-korbanot. And basically she said, the Torah came and made a declaration that all domesticated animals are exempt from the mitzvah of covering this blood. This is the words of the Chinuch. This is exactly what it says. Sharsha mitzvah, he said, this all depends on the blood, and it's simply appropriate and proper for human beings not to be so easygoing with blood. Cavalier, exactly, with blood. You see blood, don't rush and eat. Let it be covered. The Sheikh just said that don't just see a pile of blood in front of you and I'm chewing into a piece of flesh of that slaughtered animal. It's not right. And this only applies by domesticated animals because, but non-domesticated animals because the domesticated animals are usually being slaughtered, right? Nobody chinuch. Nice explanation, a sensible insight.
What happens if you're on a ship for whatever reason? You've got wildlife there, you've got chickens on there, you make the sacrifice.
You mean a shrita? You slaughter it.
Yeah. So what do you do in that?
It's interesting what you're saying, because the Gemara discusses that there has to be earth. And the Gemara brings different ideas how to use earth when you don't have earth. And one of them is to take a golden coin and crush it and make from it a powder to cover blood, because there's a verse somehow which connects afrod za'av, which connects the word earth with gold. And that's how the connection comes. You asked it. But there's all kinds of halachas, what can be used for. I think the Gemara says that in Chulin, there's a chapter in Tractate Chulin, which is called Kisu Yadam, which deals with this law. But this is the chinuch's approach. I will buy it. The Kli Yakar, another classic commentator, over 500 years ago in Prague, you also mentioned it many times, a classic commentator on the Chumash, he says simply he says that the reason for covering, the main reason is to create a distinction. A person should remember that you're not allowed to eat blood. So by the fact that you need to cover it after slaughtering, it will serve you as a reminder, a signal to remember blood is not for me. But then he asks, what about the domesticated animals? He says, these doesn't need a symbol, a recognition, because we are already familiar with the fact that their blood is being, again, poured on the altar. Like it says, this is going to be on the altar for atonement, so this doesn't need me, not ready to stay away from it. But chicken blood or deer blood, we are to remind ourselves that this is not for us. A nice Jewish boy does not eat blood. Covering the blood will be a reminder. Okay, nice explanation. I think we can take it. Sold. Then comes the Orach Chaim Hakadosh, Reb Chaim ben Attar. He lived over 300 years ago, the famous Moroccan sage. He says, and he goes back to what was mentioned earlier, he compares that to burial. He says simply, it is a respect to the blood. But that's what the verse says. Damo benafsho. He explained what is damo benafsho. It says in the verse, ki damo benafsho, on verse on verse 14. Ki nefesh kol basar, damo you, it's his blood. On verse 14, ki nefesh kol basar, damo benafsho. For the life of any creature, its blood represents its life. Domoi benafshe. He says the blood is where the soul is. That's why we have to cover the blood, because the blood is the representative of the soul, of the life energy of this animal. So then, just like God commanded us to bury a person who dies because of his honor, so too we have to cover an animal. And it goes into all explanation what's the difference from a domesticated animal, which I'm not going to go into now. But this is basically a famous concept which is actually brought down in the Medrash. The Medrash says when Cain murdered his brother Hevel, the Medrash says who buried him? Says the Gemara, says the Medrash, Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Bdat. Rabbi Eliezer ben Bdat says it was the birds of the sky and the non-domesticated kosher animals, which is basically the deer. Is there any other non-domesticated kosher animal except the deer?
Different types
Different types of deers. Okay.
How about buffalo? They are wild.
Well, yeah, they're wood, they're forest
Yeah.
buffalo.
So they came and buried them. The Medrash says they came and buried Hevel. So God said that, says the Medrash, that their reward is going to be that they're going to receive two brachot. One is the bracha al shchita, which every animal gets, and then they're going to get also an additional bracha, the bracha al kisui adam, which is the blessing that you make when covering the blood or when covering the blood. The Medrash Tanchuma says a little different. The Medrash Tanchuma says that Cain killed Hevel, and he didn't know what to do. Hevel was lying on the ground. Cain was never at a funeral. He didn't know what do we do with that dead. What do we do with that dead body now? And nobody died. And God miraculously caused two kosher birds to be displayed in front of him, and one bird killed the other. And Cain is watching that the bird killed the other. Then the bird goes and digs up some earth from the ground and takes the other bird who just died and covers them with the soil. So Cain said, that's a good idea. Let me do the same. And he actually buried Hevel. Says the Medrash, that's why the birds married it, the mitzvah of covering the blood, because they introduced the concept of kisu yadam, the idea of covering blood. Medrash Tanchuma, well, this is basically what the Rachaim says, and this is what is brought out in halacha. The halacha actually says that it's like measure for measure. In other words, it's not only to get another bracha only, but it's measure for measure. You covered blood, therefore the blood will be covered. So it's a part of the mitzvah of burial, which is acts of kindness, Gemilut Chasadim, and there is the respect to the living, and there's the respect to the dead, and the respect to the dead is the burial. So this is what the Medrash says. The Rebbe takes it into another very beautiful direction when he speaks about the idea of covering the blood. The Rebbe asked a simple question. Why? It has to be something about blood, the covering of the blood. Quoting the earlier mentioned Gemara, that the source for all mitzvot, the Gemara says the language, avu and the kulu. How do we know how to respect mitzvahs? Who is the father for the principle? Dam, the mitzvah of blood. It has to be something about blood which contains a message which goes across all the mitzvot, that mitzvah should become the source of our knowledge and our awareness how we should respect mitzvot. It has to be something with the mitzvah of blood that is only found in blood. The Rebbe brings the chinuch, he also, what you mentioned earlier, he actually brings a Ramban. The Ramban tells us, the Ramban Nachmanides writes that in the Torah, God commands us to cover the blood of the animal and the foal who are not being offered on the altar, right? Because there's usually not an offering of birds except for a pigeon for a mother who gives birth, and a dove, and who else? I think a Mitzorah. Right. And even then, they are not being slaughtered. They are being kind of, with a nail. But domesticated animals, most available domesticated animals are being slaughtered by the sake of God for atonement, and therefore they don't need to be covered. It's only this non-shechted animal, which in the desert anyway they did not eat non-shechted meat, right?
They didn't have.
They didn't
the
have,
estimated deer,
right?
or any deer.
Right. So either way, so in other words, what comes out is that the obligation of covering the blood, according to Nachmanides, the obligation of covering the blood has to do with the possibility of placing the blood over the altar. Because you place it over the altar, therefore you don't need to cover. But since you don't place it over the altar, therefore you cover it. It's actually in the verses, it seems to, like if you saw at verse 11, what does it say? Right? Then we're going back to verse 11. For the soul of the flesh is in blood. And what happened to that blood? I already designated it. I already assigned it for you to be providing your atonement by spilling it on the altar. Al Kain, continues verse 12. Therefore, I told you don't need blood, right? And instead, cover it with earth. So basically, it seems the way the verses are written, Nachmanides' idea makes sense to say that the prohibition of eating blood and the mitzvah of covering blood, it's all as a result from the fact that this blood was not to be spilled on the altar. Otherwise, that's what the blood would have gone for. I wouldn't have to cover it. I wouldn't have to tell you not to eat it, because obviously not to eat. It goes on the altar. In other words, from Nachmanides comes out that two things. The very fact that the mitzvah of covering blood is only in non-domesticated animals and in birds, but it doesn't apply to domesticated animals, number one. And number two, that it's only accustomed with non-sacrificial meat, but not by sacrifices, is sharing the same message, right? It's the same context. That the blood of a non-domesticated animal and the blood of a fall of a bird, which is the majority of them are not being spilled over the altar. This is sacrificial blood, right? This is not sacrificial blood, and this blood is what you do the mitzvah of covering blood, right? But any domesticated blood, which is the majority of them are being what? Slaughtered for the sake of God, they're slaughtered on the altar, then we don't have to cover them. In other words, the idea of covering the blood is kind of a negative idea. Blood is something which can only be put for the altar. The moment it's not for the altar, you got to cover it. Right? It can only be put on the altar. If it's not for the altar, you got to cover. What's the point? So the Rebbe says something like this. He goes into more a Hasidic approach, but it's a very important approach. He says like this. When it comes to blood, we all understand, like the verse says, blood is livelihood. Blood is energy, right? Hadam hu nefesh, like the verse says. The blood represents the soul. And blood represents life, energy, excitement, vitality, right? That's all the blood is, right? Yes. And this is the idea what God wants from us, to offer blood. What does he tell us? That you should put your energy and your blood where? Like Nachmanides says, on the altar, meaning anything which has to do with holiness, anything which has to do with serving God, that you spill on the altar. That your energy, your excitement should be involved in mitzvot. That's what you should take the so-called, what did they say, the heated blood, right? Blood is hot, blood is warm. That warmth should be in matters of kedusha. That's number one. Blood has to be spilled on the altar. That's number one. That's where blood belongs. When it comes to non-sacrificial meat, mean when it comes to servicing God, but not as a part of holy matters, everything a person does is in essence a service to God. You can go to work and serve God. You can go for a hike and serve God. You can eat and drink and serve God. Yes, you can do it. But it's like slaughtering a foal or like slaughtering an undomesticated animal. This is not part of the altar service. So let's not do it too excitedly. Do it because you have to. Don't go and put the same energy and excitement and enthusiasm in eating. You okay? Need water? Yes, there's water. Go get some water. Don't go and put the same enthusiasm and excitement, right? And fire when I'm eating cholent. Yes, but it's not, davening. If you do it by davening, you do it by the cholent too. Between davening and cholent, you want to see you do it in the davening. That's when you should put your slahavus. That's when you should put your excitement. Mainly, as the Rebbe points out even more, he says that when you are involved in the so-called, in the mundane matters, but obviously for the sake of God, you cover it with earth because earth represents nullification. And when a person is involved in worldly matters, he has to arouse in himself a sense of nullification to godliness, so that will ensure that he is not being drawn after the physical tempted matter, but to use it for the service of Hashem. And this is the word. The word is simply that when it comes to holy matters, don't cover the blood. Let it be open. Let it be spilled. Let the excitement be represented. Let it feel it to yourself and let others seeing you excited about performing a mitzvah, and they would perhaps follow. Let them be attracted to the idea. Therefore, you don't cover it. When it comes to your personal physical matters, even though they too are a service of God, we're not talking about a schlock who is doing his life just because of his personal enjoyment. Talking about a person, a human being that eats and drinks and works and exercises, and everything he does is also to kind of, because that's what God wants from you to do. Great. But, relax. We don't have to see you, making the biggest deal about it and put significance to you, excitement, because that's not a place for blood. That's the place to activate more a sense of nullification to godliness. And then you will be put in order. Then perhaps you're going to be intact. Otherwise, physicality by nature draws you down. That's what happens. More potatoes you eat and more chicken and meat you consume, you are being drawn to physical. Right? That's the nature of the beast. As much as you can convince yourself that I'm only doing it the covered Shabbos Kodesh and in honor of this. That's what it is.
The blood that is poured on the altar you talked about, so it doesn't congeal. You have to stir it.
Exactly. Very good. Good point. Very nice. So that's another idea that brings out the importance of expressing your excitement, not to allow it to kind of be subdued, and so to speak. That's the idea. In general, when we are coming out from Pesach, and we left Egypt, what was the first plague against Egypt? Blood. So it says in Kabbalah, because if you want to break away from Klippa, which represents the powers of impurity, the first thing is you have to get out the excitement of impurity. Dam is excitement, warm. Don't, even if you treat it and you deal with it, you associate with it, at least do it in a cold manner. Don't be excited about it. Don't proud yourself on it. And in order to get rid of Egypt, the first thing they had to break the warmth, excitement, enthusiasm of Klippa. That has to be broken first.
Yeah, but the Nile, the river was a god to them. So
right? But the river was a god to them. But the idea that the river becoming blood is to show that we're breaking you by taking away your excitement from your so-called God and find your excitement where it's supposed to be. And that's why blood is such an important message when it comes to mitzvahs. Torah tells us we want you to know which blood to be covered, so you should know which blood to be uncovered. And it's all centers around blood. That becomes the source for this principle, not to be disrespectful to mitzvahs. The interesting story, as the Rebbe said, the story, it was about the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe was the son of the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman. They called him the Mittler Rebbe. Mittler means the in-between Rebbe, because they were Hasidim who knew his father, the Alter Rebbe. They knew him, and they even lived after he passed away, and they knew his successor, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe. So they call them the Rebbe in between, the Mittler Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe is the first. The Mittler is the Rebbe in between. The Rebbe was a 6-year-old boy, 5 years old boy actually, going up to 6. He was learning by a melamed. He was learning by a teacher. He brings his name. His teacher's name even is even recorded to. The name of the teacher was Bear the Melamed, Bear the teacher. Which Bear Melamed lived as a neighbor to Avram the doctor, which he was the doctor of the town of Liozna. This was the Alter Rebbe lived. And once when the Mittler Rebbe was a child, 5-year-old boy, he was by Bear the Melamed, the teacher. He heard over the door that Avram the doctor is kind of expressing frustration, complaining by saying, "Oi, we're already deep in Elul. Elul is the last month of the year. We are deep in Elul, and I did not prepare the piafkes yet." You know what piafkes are? They're the little worms, which their job is to take out. They used to attach it. Leashes.
Oh, leeches.
Leeches.
Things you try to get rid of.
How do you spell it in English?
Leech.
1 second, I'm going to write it down. I don't have a pen. Okay, write it.
I'll remind you.
No, here, tell it to me.
Leeches.
Leeches. Leeches.
That's where the expression, he's a leech.
A leech, exactly. How many times do you hear it? How do you know about it?
What?
How do you know about it?
You hear about it from, when you're even little in school and everything.
I hope no one ever told it to you.
Pardon?
I hope no one ever told it to you.
No, but
Yeah, I'm going to make you sure.
don't be a leech. they say.
So the leeches. So that's like today they do it differently. They call it bankes. It's called kosod ruach. What's in English kosod ruach? What bankes? You put cups and it's
Vacuum.
Vacuum.
like vacuums, which also take your blood,
Yeah.
And it sucks the skin up into the glass.
right? So that's the modern way of doing it, or they have different ways of doing it.
They haven't done that for hundreds of years.
No, they didn't. In India, they used to do
Is
it.
it really?
Oh, yeah.
They stick a coin, take a little piece of cotton with some alcohol, and then put it on the coin, and then put the cup on top, which would eat up all the oxygen and would create a vacuum.
Okay.
It's supposed to take the poisons or evil.
Yeah, it takes out the poisons of the blood,
To move the
and it causes the blood to move. You know, as the heat of the boiling healthy blood is kind of to calm them down, also to direct them properly. And usually those leeches you can only get through the summer, because in the winter they used to hide because of the coldness,
They used to bleed.
right? So Avram the doctor, the Mittler Rebbe heard Avram the doctor is saying, "Man, in the middle of Elul, and I did not prepare the leeches yet." When he walked out from his teacher, he walked into shul and he saw a group of Hasidim sitting, and it was before Rosh Hashanah, and they were laughing kind. He said, "You're laughing, you know why? Because we are deep Elul, and you still didn't prepare your leeches, and that's why you're laughing." And they took it, they thought probably he heard it from his father. And they got very excited about it. They started using interpretation. We got to get rid of our, poison blood and get refresh and revive the fresh blood. And then they find out it wasn't actually his father who said it, the doctor who said it, but the Alter Rebbe actually confirmed. He said that's what the Baal Shem Tov taught us. That anytime you hear something, you should try to interpret it as a lesson in serving God. And it was very good that my son, as it so naturally by him that he can figure it out. And what's the idea? So the Rebbe spoke about it, and the Rebbe explained that leeches have two purposes. They take out the spoiled blood, and they also calm the boiled hot blood, the healthy blood. And the Rebbe says that blood, again, means vitality and energy, which mainly belong in the world of Kedusha, in the world of holiness. Klipa, on its own initiative, doesn't have any warmth. It's only for the sake of choosing, so God allows them also to present excitement. But essentially, Klipa is cold. There's no blood there. So the Rebbe says, what's the idea of calming the blood? Maybe it's not so good to have calm blood. Maybe it's good to be excited. The Rebbe actually said a story that Chassidim once walked by a frozen river, and they saw a guy is carving a cross into the ice. So Chassid says, you see what coldness does to you? Once you're frozen, you can even carve a cross into you. So the whole idea of freezingness and coldness is not really a part of Kedusha. So why should it be, why the idea of calming blood? Or like we said before, why should we cover blood? And the same idea is, because when it comes to excitement, when it comes to energy, you need to moderate it. Very good. You have to moderate it because it's, after all, it represents the person. The egoistic values of a person may be going wild. Once you're excited, so you're overly excited, and you're more excited, and you go and you can break some other people along the way because of your excitement. And that's the idea of covering blood. And that's the idea of the slitches, which are needed also kind of to moderate the blood. You know, some people can be excited. A guy wakes up Yom Tov morning. You heard there's a mitzvah to eat a meal on Yom Tov. He gets up from his bed, doesn't daven, doesn't go to shul. He goes straight to the table and he starts presenting himself with a meal. What are you doing? What do you mean? A mitzvah! Joy on Yom Tov! Hello. Joy on Yom Tov comes with an order. Somebody says, okay, I want to serve God. I'm going to come to daven, me and my wife. Mechitza, why am mechitza? I'm excited to stand together and serve Hashem. Excitement is not always kosher. Excitement can take you away from where you belong. And that's very, very important and crucial when it comes to all kinds of itlahavus. You have to calm it. You have to calm it. You have to moderate it. You have to cover it even. Only in special opportunities, like you are presenting something to the altar, in the rules, what the altar expects, that is when you spill it and you go with celebration and with joy and with enthusiasm. But otherwise, you have to be careful. Yes.
You were saying that also what Ken was saying about the blood not to congeal if you're going to put it on the altar.
Yes,
Well, that's one of the chemicals that leech would put in your system is to keep it from congealing.
Exactly.
Right. Keep it from congealing into one end, but at the same time, also calm the boiling blood. It has to be calm. Either way, this is the mitzvah of covering blood that we discussed tonight. And we saw that this mitzvah is something which applies even today. And even if you're not a shaychet, and you're not slaughtering chickens every day, you should still be involved in covering the bloods and uncovering the blood. Depends on which bloods we are dealing with. And the main thing, to be enthusiastic in servicing God, is very, very important. Have a wonderful good night. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm sure you enjoyed it. Adele, we had you registered for the Seder. We missed you. Who were you?
Yeah, I got some stuff at home, like kids got sick and other things, so we had to do it ourselves at home.
Okay, I just want to note that we noticed that you weren't there, and we noticed that you registered. Hopefully another time.
Yeah,
Very good.
I have questions for you. I'll bring my Chumash and I'll bring Sidur. I have some questions about the prayer before the going to bed, because 4 weeks ago you mentioned that certain phrases should only be said on Shabbos, and they appear there in those pages. So one day I will come to shul and ask you
Okay,
this
not a
question.
problem. Not a problem.
That's
Sure.
important for me.
Very good. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night. Don't forget the counting of the Omer. Last night it was 8. And after 9 o'clock, you can count again. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.